How did you get started on heroin?
I really spun out of control when I lost custody of my kids.
It begins on the 1st of January 2018, and we held a small open house which was sparsely attended, but one of the people who attended was a woman from our church, and I didn't know this at the time, but she, it turns out, had lost an adult child to addiction, overdose, and she is mad as hell. 2 years later, 3 years later, she's still mad. And she buttonholed me and said, "Erich, you should be shooting addicts." And I had this very brief Elmer Fudd moment and suppressed it and said, "Well, I'm sorry, but I'm much better known for landscapes and architectural work. You should be shooting addicts." Well, thank you for telling me. What if you wanted to do something about photographing addicted persons? What would you do? Black and white for impact. On location, no studio lighting, available lighting only. If I did this really right, why shouldn't I tell these folks stories and maybe do some good for them and for a lot of other people? After all, I'm a writer, right? And I am. And something went click, and by the time I got to Saratoga Springs, New York, and visited an old friend, I had this whole thing pretty well formed and spoke to him about it. He says, "Get on it." And so I went to see my buddies at Okemo skiing and told them about this, and they all thought it was a great idea, and 2 of them wrote small checks to help. The next question that people like to ask me is, how did you find people to photograph? And the answer is 3 methods. The first and most effective, but not the fastest, was an ad in Craigslist, actively using addicts for a serious art project, and then went on at length to describe what this was, and that there was no pay. Participants got a $10 McDonald's card. I know better than to give cash to addicted folks. And I got a few. And meanwhile, my heat pump went out, and a guy called Mike Harris, who's done heating and cooling stuff for me for years, and who is a recovering alcoholic and who has started a facility in Hamilton for people to be to be in as they're drying out. It's not treatment, but it's keep folks busy, keep them off the streets, keep them out of the bars. And Mike's funded that himself. And he's not wealthy, but he cares. So he said, "I want in." And I said, "Well, can you help me find subjects to photograph?" I hate the word subjects because it's the wrong relationship. I call these folks portrait volunteers. So, "Can you help me find portrait volunteers?" And he said, "Sure. So come on up to Hamilton and we'll see what we can do." So I did. And we literally went sort of hunting on the streets for people who were pretty obviously addicted. And Mike would go talk to them because, I'm obviously not a person of the street, and bring them over, and I'd ask them, we'd do a little interview, and at the end of that, we would start photography. And the 3rd woman we photographed that day was so excited, she went and rounded up 6 other people. I'm not kidding. And she, by the way, is now, a year and a half later, in recovery and clean and pleased as punch about it. She's got a bunch of other issues, but she's on her way. So she was a huge help. So Craigslist, actively hunting, and referrals. And that's how I found people. The hardest people to find, I wanted to show that recovering addicted folks can hold and do hold highly serious and responsible jobs. And I got a little help with that from a friend of mine, Marcus Rinkensmeyer, I still can't pronounce it, who's one of the best landscape photographers in the United States. He's a lot better than I'll ever be. But he was the administrative head for the Arizona Supreme Court and all the court system. So he rounded up, he said, I've got a couple of people who are running the largest recovery outfit in the Southwest, and they're both active, you know, they're both recovering. And so he set that up, and I flew out to Phoenix, and bingo, got these two people. And that was the only out-of-towners. Most everybody else was, or out-of-staters, with very few exceptions. The bulk of the people are from Southwest Ohio. Cincinnati, Dayton, Middletown, Hamilton, just across the river in Covington and Newport, up as far as southeast of Columbus. You know, so it's basically this cluster. Okay, who were the people that volunteered to be portrait subjects for Faces of Addiction? Anybody and everybody, though the average age was getting up there. All told, I interviewed around 62 people, photographed them. In the end, 54 appear in the show in the book, but there are only 50 sets. A set being a page of narrative, their life story, and a page of the photograph, or in a couple of cases plural, so that's why the numbers work like that. We had both active users and people in recovery, and we needed the recovery people because Faces of Addiction does not talk about hopelessness. Hopelessness isn't the point of the book. It's not, these are portraits. They are not horror shots. Horror shots are easy. They're everywhere. Portraits are different because they focus on the person more than on the situation. That's the difference. So these are portraits with life stories attached. And some of those are success stories. As I told you about the two folks out in Arizona. And that's very important. The youngest was 8. She was not an active user, but she's in a family that's completely addicted. That's a real horror story. This is a family in which addiction runs rampant. The mother in the family swore she wasn't addicted, and she's an RN. Both her daughters are addicts, and at the time I met them were actively addicted. And the younger of those, the two daughters are not twins, they're a couple of years apart, but they might as well be. They're close enough to be finishing each other's sentences and so forth. The younger daughter has a daughter named Ruthie, and Ruthie was 8 years old, as she told me. And she said she wished her mommy weren't using drugs because everybody yells at everybody. And I left feeling, most of these interviews, feeling very, very positive about the whole experience, and I know that the people who volunteered did too. This chart, which is a schematic showing the interactions amongst causes, lists causes of addictions and how they interconnect. This has been vetted by 3 people, but I think this is a therapeutic tool for use in recovery programs, and I want to get it out there along with the book. The green areas are things you can't do anything about. The red areas are physical injury and pain. The purple or fuchsia are genetic or personality-based causes, and that's covered the lot. The most important factor in addiction is failure of attunement. Attunement is the process by which a primary caregiver and an infant become locked together. The mom or dad is attuned to the infant's attuned to them with an awareness of being separate. If that process fails, that kid's going to be needy all his or her life. So I would chalk that up as the #1 cause of addiction. Cultural norms are another big one, but if you've read Hillbilly Elegy, you will understand how strong a role cultural norms play in addiction. It's what everybody does without saying so. Culture is defined here as the laws everybody lives by that aren't written down. You've got the age distribution, and you can see that it bulks up between 44 and 25. But I was astonished. I frankly thought that it would wind up being a lot of younger people, and it isn't. At least the sample that I dealt with, which is a smaller sample in the great scheme of things. Faces of Addiction exemplifies transformation. Transformation for some of the addicted people. Transformation of the non-addicted people who come in contact and who see the gallery show or read the book. And even some for me. I got to thinking that this was, as I said, a personal improvement project, but by the time I got to the East Coast, it had already redefined itself as a social justice project. What I had no idea of, none, was that this would turn into a ministry. And the ministry occurred in actually sitting down with and listening uncritically to addicted people. The act of doing that validated them as human beings, and I got this over and over and over. I don't think I'm driving this particular bus. I'm being led to do this. My church agrees, and the result is that on a very small scale, it's done a lot of good for a lot of people. The way people react to the stories and photographs has been absolutely universally the same. People are moved, and they develop a new perspective on addiction. Okay, Billy is the person who, as I say, the third person we photographed in Hamilton, and she really grabbed onto this project and has just really helped all down the line, although she's had a rocky road towards recovery. She got a form of septicemia that involved the cardiac membrane, and that put her in the ER for a few weeks, and then she needed to be on drips of antibiotics, which meant all the time for 6 weeks. And her now deceased, estranged at the time husband brought her drugs, and she OD'd in that extended care facility. They got her back, and she had to go through the whole process again of getting clean, and she's done it, and she is clean and is very happy about that. Proud of herself. She should be. This is A.J. Oglesby, and she was one of the last to be photographed. The thing about A.J. was that when she came over to talk, she was hostile, she was scared, she's an active heroin user, she was painfully uncomfortable. And we talked for maybe 40 minutes, and then we did the pictures, which flowed out of the interviews. This was standard procedure. And at the end of that, she gave me this huge hug. That made my day. It also made my day that when the gallery show opened in Cincinnati, she was there and had been clean for a couple of weeks and was trying to get admitted to mechanic school because that's what she loves doing. She repairs cars. This guy, Andre Barker, had an extremely hard path to travel. And I'm not going to go into the details about it. But to tell you, he had lost his first kids by his first marriage, was stuck basically in Cincinnati. His origins are in New England. And he was not allowed to see anybody. Well, he was living with another active user who is also doing really well now, and Andre was staying clean through running Bible study and prayer. And it blew me away when I got a note from him after the show opened in January. He has moved back to New England and has access to his children. Now, Andre taught me something, and I want to share this with you. And what Andre told me was that he had had to panhandle for a substantial amount of time. And the thing that he hated about it was that people looked through you. They could not see you. And he looked at me and he said, you know, some days a hello is worth more than $1. That's verbatim. Ever since that time, I carry a box of nutrition bars that are nutrition bars, and when I see somebody at a corner, I give them a bar.
If you were to compare me to somebody who had never used drugs before, and the general public, I look like I'm doing pretty bad. But if you compare me to where I was and who I was 4 months ago, living in an abandoned house with no running water, 75 cents to my name, and no hope in sight of getting off of this drug, I'm doing really good. I have progressed beyond that. I have a roof over my head. I have I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. My escape plan is set in motion. There is a solution within reach for me, and I'm so hopeful for that. I'm confident that as long as I continue to stay focused on my goals, which are to get clean, stay clean, reestablish my role in my family as a son, as a grandson, as a father, as a brother. As long as I keep those goals in sight and continue to keep my addiction at bay, things are going to work out just fine. Everything that I've ever aspired to do is still possible.
It took Joey another 9 months to get clean, and I don't know if he's clean now, but he sounded pretty good when he called me up in January or early February. This is not a story of hopelessness. This is a story of struggle, of pain, and of fear. Addiction creates mental health problems as well as originates from mental health problems. One key to success has been in-kind donations, and everyone who has contributed services to the project has done the work either for free or at a ridiculously reduced rate. Website design, book design, help with publishing, help to get the works framed. These are framed in museum glass. This is serious work. So all of this stuff came in because people believed in the project. And the second key for making this happen was networking. From finding subjects to finding printers to finding places to do things. It's all just been networking, and I started with zero network. And the reason networking for this has been so successful and the in-kind donations and stuff have come along, I believe this, is that people know there's a huge problem out there. This is an epidemic. And they want to do something, and they don't know what to do. So this is a little something that people can do. And that's why they've been contributing. It's not my charm. It's the project calls to them as something that's possible and positive and can be done. The gallery show has been seen by hundreds and hundreds of people. There have been 2 complete showings of all 50 sets, all 50 pieces, and 2 more scheduled for this year and the first part of 2020, and another one hanging for 2020.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
It's fantastic work.
It's really turned out to be quite a project. Well, it has, and it's going places from here. This is just some of the first. So many of the people who are in the program here have come round, and they are all delighted.
See the light in the eyes of the people who are shivering. And all the capture that.
And I walk around just
Crying is okay.
crying. I know crying is okay.
You're supposed to.
Yeah. Well, I did my share on that end.
Okay.
Right down there at the end, the ball cap, that's Robbie Tweed. Yeah. And he's number 4.
What Eric's done for this and how far he's come is amazing. And I mean, I can congratulate him 1,000% of what he's doing.
I will be doggone. You need
So
to meet
we
the
were going to
couple.
call you, and we decided we were going to do surprise.
Well, you did. You have.
got here a little bit earlier.
Have you found yourselves yet?
Yeah, down through there.
You folks are trying to do something about it. I know that. And I want to encourage you to keep working it. I'd like you folks to go out and make sure people get a chance to see if this is a useful tool. My belief is that it is, but I need evidence. I need to get results. So there we are. And I want to thank you very much for your attention. You're a terrific group to talk with because you all get it. And thank you.